All right, friends, we are about wrapped up. Wiring is officially done, so let me show you what I did. Just to button it up, if you saw the last video, you know I only had a few things left to go. So let me hop on down here and show you. So in the battery compartment, remember I had the thick red line coming in from the regulator. That was juice, that's power coming back into the circuit, the charging system. Brought that red line down around, and at this point I like zip tied it to this main power wire coming off the battery, and that was just so that I could have equal length and deal with the pack out here to cut those two wires to the same length and put a large eyelet on them. This is 2 of the 12 gauge wires, so just for reference for those tracking along, this is like a yellow connector. It's a bigger gauge yellow connector. Got that hooked up, so then this is power from the battery. So you got battery and charging circuit into the copper post, and then power out here to the key switch, and juice back from the key switch to the distribution block, and then out the side of the distribution block to the 2 inline fuses. These are blade style fuses, 15 amps a piece. Your 16 gauge wire can basically handle up to 15 amps on short runs. If you look online, you might find that 16 gauge wire can only handle 10 amps or maybe even less. But a lot of times those gauge charts are based on residential use, regardless of the voltage input. So on short runs like this for motorcycles, you got 1 foot or 2 foot runs, you're pretty good up to 15 amps on one of these wires. And if you have major questions about amperage or wattage or voltage and those calculations, maybe I can do a separate video on that. But inline fuses, and then the inline fuses go out everywhere. So one of the inline fuses is key because that ties into this yellow wire, and that's the ignition wire, the coils, spark plugs. So this yellow wire comes up through the backbone, and you can no longer see yellow because I did shrink tube in here. And if you watch the video where I did the rear brake lines, I kind of had a similar deal here. There was 3 wires coming in, so I shrink tubed those. This piece of shrink tube goes about 1.5 inches down into the backbone. I fed it through. Now that part of the 1.5 inches back here is not shrunk onto the wires because the heat wouldn't get there, but right about here it's shrunk. So that's going to be extra protection on those wires. You got 3 wires coming down. And then underneath, let me see if I can get a good angle on it. Oh, it's just barely visible. I have a situation where 2 of the wires needed to go off to the right to one of the coil. That's the yellow hot in and the white wire from the Dyna S ignition. And then 1 wire off to the left, that's the blue wire from the Dyna S ignition. This is all per their diagram. And I have a jumper wire back here that connects the 2 coils together. This is all per Dyna's specs. But I had that condition where I wanted like 1 big fat shrink tubed pack of wires to split into 2. Did the same process here where it was shrink tubed and then like 1 of the big glue sleeve shrink tubes over top of that junction. Everything's super tight. No water can get in, no vibration, no weird stuff. You don't see any color wires. Everything's protected, everything's solid. It's zip tied to the back of this dual post that I had welded up, and then zip tied loosely to the fuel line. So there is flex, there's play, that nothing's yanked tight, right? So that's all done. That's all I had to do to the wiring. So at this point, this bike is fully wired up. There's no other loose ends. We covered the headlight and taillight systems. We covered the battery tray. We covered the under the bike with the brake and the oil and the dummy light and the neutral. We covered the switch panel and all those parts and pieces coming in, and now we've covered the coil. So right now, I actually just have, for safekeeping in the garage, I have the ground off. That way nothing is hitting the battery. There's no funny business. I'm going to basically leave this off until I get the motor tuned up, and then at the last kind of moment when I go to, fire the motor and kick over and do that stuff, I'll hook the battery up and do a whole electrical test. So this is just off for now. I want to get a new multimeter and actually hook this up and see if any juice is draining anywhere in the system. Because ultimately I want to leave this hooked up when it's parked in the garage and not have it, you know, trickling down the battery. I want to make sure all the connections are good that way, but that's a separate video later on down the line. So I also spent some time today messing around and getting the throttle cable worked out. So this is a Harley throttle cable that came on the bike actually, and it's too long. I mean, it's got like this wire out here that kind of flops, but I really don't care. And I was able to get it mated up to a 7/8 British style throttle body by way of JB weld up into the hole and then let it cure for 2 days. Drill, tap for the 5/16 18 thread that the Harley throttle piece had. That's now solid in there. Tested that. This piece is supposed to move. It's loose. It's a pivot hinge. So I might do some sort of like a stay here, kind of like I did for the ribbon throttle cable stay down here. I might do another piece up here somehow later on if it flops around too much while I'm riding. But got that adjusted so that I could complete what I think might be one of the first square bar setups that well, I know it's the first one that I've ever seen. I don't want to go so far as saying it's the first one ever because everything's been done in the chopper world. Well, almost everything's been done. I have to imagine somebody's done this before. But now it is fully functional throttle, and yes, the carb and all the gas is empty. I'm not flooding the bike right now. But it works. It comes back to 0 and a nice plane out with 1-inch handlebars. Got full open and closed. It is all functioning. So at this point, I gotta throw the seat back on. I gotta throw the sissy bar bag back on, but then I'm gonna get into tuning. So the engine, I need to do a tune-up, and at that point, run through tune-up, flush out the fluids, clean everything up, and make sure the spark plugs are good and gapped correctly, time it. Oh, I gotta throw an extra fitting on the bottom of the oil pump there for the puke hole, and a hose better out, because I know this check ball needs replaced and worked, but I don't feel like taking the oil pump off yet. So I want a solution that allows me to not blow oil all over my garage floor again. So I gotta mess with that. But engine stuff, that's what's next. Electrical is pretty much done at this point. So the purpose of these videos was to kind of show you from scratch. Say you just bought a bike, say you just bought a chopper or a Harley that has been, I'll say, loved. Maybe loved a little bit too much by other people, and you get it home and you realize, man, there's just a rat's nest of wire and you just want a cool, clean chopper. How do you go about doing it? That was the whole point of these videos, to kind of show you from scratch how to go about it, how to design your own wiring diagram, how to show you what parts and tools and fittings to consider. And hopefully this has done that. Hopefully this has been helpful, at least giving you some tips and tricks along the way to consider. And so that being said, I know that this is just a simple chopper wiring diagram. I know that this is a pretty straightforward deal. There's no turn signals, there's no starter relays, there's nothing complicated about this bike. And so if you have any questions about your own build or your own process that I didn't cover here, let me know. Just hit me up in the comments, send me an email, shoot me a chat, or you can go and follow on Instagram at username at bpeak82. bpeak82. You can follow along for eventually when I fire this guy up and go for rides. Stay tuned to the YouTube channel here as well. I usually, whenever I ride, I rock a helmet cam and try and video the rides that I do. So once this thing does get running, we'll have some good helmet cam footage for sure, hopefully for you guys. So fingers crossed that everything works well. I know the engine is old. I know the engine has some rough spots in it, but hopefully it's good enough to get me through a season here. It's about to be fall here in North Carolina, which is prime riding season. So hopefully I can get through that and then maybe in the cold winter months, get some engine work done, do a top end, and take it from there. So cheers, guys. I appreciate you watching. If you've watched all the videos and stuck in there this long, big thumbs up to you. Thank you for hanging in there. And until next time, take care. Cheers.